All right, good afternoon, and welcome to the 2019 Free Learning Conference presented by Appalachian State University. This is the 320 session. I am Tom Van Gilder, Director of our Learning Technology Services and part of the planning team for the Free Learning Conference this year. And our team has had a full day of some great sessions, and I think this one will be as well. A reminder that this session is being recorded in Zoom, and it will be available later on the conference website, as well as probably a link to Melanie's slides. So this session is titled, Keep It Simple, How to Tackle Accessibility in Your Online Course. I'm pleased to introduce to you Melanie Ely from UNC Greensboro, where she serves as the Web Accessibility Coordinator for their online division. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Melanie. Thanks so much for doing this for us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So we're going to talk for a little bit about some simple ways that you can tackle accessibility in online courses. Do want to say that we only have 30 minutes, so we won't be able to cover everything that you would need to work on or address in your online courses, but we definitely will look at some fairly easy or simple fixes that you can do, as well as look at some things that you can do in terms of planning and trying to figure out where to start, where to begin. So discussion topics that we'll cover, we'll just briefly talk about who benefits from accessible design. We'll also talk about where to begin, how you want to get started with that. As I mentioned before, we'll talk about some simple accessibility fixes that you can do yourself. And then we'll talk about some resources as well. So the obvious answer to who benefits would be people with disabilities. Students who are enrolled in online courses really need to be able to access all content in that course. And you have your categories here. There's vision, hearing, mobility, learning and cognitive, which can include dyslexia, ADHD, auditory processing, Asperger's syndrome, just a few examples there. And it also includes those who maybe have a broken limb, maybe there's a pregnancy, an illness of some sort that would cause them to have a disability for a temporary period of time. So each of these categories can be affected by inaccessible content in an online course. But in addition to people with disabilities, actually all of us can benefit from accessible features if they're incorporated into those online courses. One common example that I know a lot of people use, if you search the internet or you're on social media, Facebook, that sort of thing, maybe you're in a crowded area or maybe you're in a quiet area, an area where you're not able to hear the audio. If you're watching a video that has captioning, that is a way that you can access that video without having to actually hear it. So not only would that benefit, of course, the person that is deaf or hard of hearing or has a hearing impairment, it could also benefit those who have the full capacity of hearing in those situations where it's not appropriate maybe to have that audio playing. And there are several other ways that those without disabilities also benefit from having these features available. So where to begin? So one thing I like to tell faculty and staff or remind them is that we are responsible, of course, for providing accessible content for our students, whether it's face-to-face, online, or what have you, but particularly in online courses, we are responsible for that. However, the reality is you're not going to be able to go from having nothing be accessible to having everything accessible all at one time. So you do have to strategize, you have to plan, you have to make some decisions as far as where to start. And so the 5 categories that I have here, I think is a good place to begin. You want to definitely look at prioritizing. If you have, a whole list of classes that maybe has not ever been reviewed for accessibility, or accessibility wasn't thought about when the courses were developed, you definitely want to determine how and where you're going to start. So of course, the first type of course that you're going to want to look at, or a course that would need to take precedent for being remediated, would be a course an existing course that you have, and you know that there's a student who is enrolled who has a disability, or you're aware of a student with a disability who is planning to enroll in your course. This, of course, would be a reactive response to making a course accessible, but it absolutely would have to take precedent over any other courses that you may be looking at or considering remediating. The next type of course would be new courses. So new courses, it's really a great place to begin. If you already have a list of courses that you've been working on or that you've been using for quite some time, but you plan to create a new course, or you're going to revise an existing course that you have, that would be a great time, a great opportunity to look at incorporating some accessibility features. It's always easier to build a course with accessibility features as you're developing that course, as opposed to creating that course and then having to go back and remediate. If you're thinking about accessibility and you are addressing some of those accessibility issues as you're creating the course, it may take some time on the front end, but in the long run, the course will be accessible. You won't have to, like I said, go back and remediate, which a lot of times can take way more time to do. The next type of course that you may want to look at would be existing courses that have a large enrollment. So a course maybe that is pretty popular, maybe it's a general education course that tends to be offered frequently. If you're having to prioritize and pick and choose where you're going to start, that would be another thing to consider. Because if it's a course that is able to reach a lot of students, then the chances of that student with a disability enrolling in that type of course is probably going to be more likely. And so if you've already addressed those accessibility issues, then you won't have to worry about, again, going back and remediating that when that student with a disability enrolls in the course. From there, you want to look at your existing entry-level courses. Again, another good place to start. And sometimes that could also be a course that has large enrollment. Again, thinking about reaching as many students as you're able to, thinking about the type of course that would be more common, I guess. Also with entry-level courses, of course, if you're looking at a program, most students, not all students, but most students are going to start with those entry-level courses. They're going to start with those freshman courses. So again, if you have a student with a disability that is entering into your program, or is starting as a freshman and is planning to enter into your program, having those entry-level courses, or at least starting with entry-level courses and making those accessible, can certainly go a long way and reduce the chances of you being in a situation where the student has enrolled and then you're faced with that number one category where you're having to remediate the course because the student with the disability has enrolled. And then from there, any other courses that you'd want to consider. But if you're looking at, again, prioritizing the 1 through 4 and really in that order, I think is how you'd want to think about choosing what courses to start with. Okay, so next steps with beginning that process to remediate or to create accessible courses. Again, you're not going to be able to make every course accessible all at one time, and it will take some time to make one course accessible. So you definitely want to start slowly. Again, consider accessibility as you're developing any new courses. And for existing courses, if you've decided to work on an existing course that you have, it's definitely a good idea to develop a plan. And you can start that plan by taking a look at your course. So just do an inventory of your course, looking at the different resources that you have in your course, any assignments, activities, assessments, the reading materials, anything that students should be able to access in your course. It's a great idea to just make a list of those, generate a list of all of those resources that you'll have in your course. And from there, you want to categorize those items and try to look at items that may pose or may be an accessibility issue, could be a cause for concern. With this list, ideally the next step would be to then start working on those accessibility issues. Again, I know that that's not always possible, but can't stress enough, the more you do before that student with a disability enrolls in your class, the less you'll have to do when that occurs. It does take a considerable amount of time, like I said, after the course has been created and you're going back to remediate, but think about having to do that work while the student is waiting to access whatever that content is. So like I said, the more you can do before you fall into that situation, the better off you'll actually be. So like I said, you can use that list to categorize items looking for potential accessibility issues. If you're not able to actually move forward with addressing those issues, at the very least, having that list is a huge step, because again, at least you'll know what those issues are. And some questions that you'll want to ask yourself and you want to make note of on your list all relate to potential accessibility issues. If you're using any video or audio files, if you're using any resources that have images, diagrams, charts, anything of that sort. If you're using tables or you're requiring students, or students have to use equations in your course. Also, really important to know whether or not the textbook and the required readings you have, if they're accessible. And then also wanting to know if your website or your digital resources can be accessed by keyboard. So these are some basic questions that you want to ask yourself. Depending on where you are in terms of your proficiency with accessibility, you may not have all of the answers to this, but at least having the questions, having your list gives you a start. But of course, you would know at least if these things are in your course. What you may not know is how do you go about fixing those or addressing those issues. For example, if you've created your list and you've identified that you've got 5 PowerPoints that you will use in the course. And maybe one of those PowerPoints has 10 slides that have images on them. So you may not know how to make those images accessible, but at least documenting the fact that there's a PowerPoint that has images in them, at the very least, you have that information, which then can allow you to move to that next step. That next step might be, again, if you are familiar with accessibility and you know how to create descriptions for those images, then that would be the next step to go in and create those descriptions for the images. But your next step could be, you don't know how to fix that. So then it's asking the question, how will these resources be made accessible? Will you do that? Will you learn how to do that? Is there someone else, maybe in another department, that can assist with that? Might you need to contact an outside vendor or a third party vendor to assist with any of the accessible issues that may occur? So there's a lot of things that could come from that list, and what your next steps are really depend on, like I said, your proficiency level with accessibility, but also the potential resources that you may have on your campus or outside vendors as well. So there are some things that you can do. Actually, there are a lot of things that you can do yourself or on your own, but there are some things that I think most people can do that are fairly simple, doesn't require a lot of training to do. This by no means is a comprehensive list of the accessibility issues that would need to be considered. But like I said, these are certainly some things that most people can do with relatively little training. And so we're going to take a look at that now. And we have descriptive links, color contrast, alternative text for images, which would include simple images and also complex images. Complex would be like a diagram or a chart, things like that. A map even would certainly be a complex image. And then we'll talk a little bit about headings and structure. So with descriptive hyperlinks, with that, you're basically not using the URL as the link in your document or in your website. You want to use a good and concise description. You want it to be short and easy to read. The idea behind this is when either the sighted person clicks on it or that student with a disability, particularly those who are using a screen reader, and maybe it's not able to access the content without a screen reader, to be able to click on that or select that link, and it will clearly describe where the link will be taking the user after the link is clicked. Readable links, definitely want to use readable links instead of the URLs because they are more user-friendly and readable for everyone. And the reasons for this, as I mentioned before, those who are using screen readers, it is difficult to have a URL there present. So someone who's not able to see and is using a screen reader, which reads the text that's on the screen. If you're using a URL, you know, some URLs are fairly simple, but there are others that have not just letters, but they may have numbers, they may have symbols, they can be very, very long. And so for a screen reader to read that, it's going to read exactly what's there, which can be very confusing. So if it's a readable link, it's going to give a preview to everyone, sighted and those who have vision impairments, but it'll give a preview of what's to come after you click on that link. It will also, with the screen reader, it'll actually provide an audible alert that a readable link is present. And I do just want to show you real quick how fairly simple it is to do this. So I'm in my PowerPoint and I am going to make the word readable in that second bullet. I'm going to make that a link. So what you can do is you select the word that you want to make a link. You can right click and then you want to find the link button And then that brings up your insert hyperlink box. As you see in the text to display box or field, it says readable. Down at the bottom of the hyperlink box is the address field. And so then you can type in the URL that you want to send your students to. So I'm going to type in the UNCG homepage. It's www.uncg.edu. I'm going to click OK. And so now the word readable is a link. And so when I go back to my presentation, if I select readable, it's now taking me to the UNCG homepage. Now, I could have, of course, put the URL in that place, but it's much easier, like I said, to read for those particularly who are using a screen reader, much more useful if it is actually a readable link. Okay, so the next area I want to talk about is color. Here, we want to definitely use color, don't want to use color alone to convey meaning. Best way to do this is you can use color, but maybe don't, or maybe use something else like a symbol. You can use text or shapes along with the color. An example, if I wanted to, for the first bullet here that says don't use color alone to convey meaning, if I want that to stand out to students, I could highlight it. Maybe I want to highlight it in yellow, but I could also use asterisks around the text. I could also use text to say, I could put the word important in front of the sentence, don't use color alone to convey meaning. So pretty simple to do. It's just something that you need to think about as you're creating your content. Also, providing good color contrast. That just basically means your background and foreground need to have good contrast. So if you have a light background, you want your foreground, which would usually be your text or your images, links, buttons. You want those things to have a dark color, and then the opposite would occur if you have a dark background. You want your foreground to have a light color. And for a lot of people, whether they have a disability or not using appropriate color can make it difficult to read and navigate and also interact with your content. But for some people, it actually will be impossible to access that content. So the next thing we want to talk about is alternative text. Here, this is especially important for someone who's using a screen reader, because without it, you won't be able to access that image, and whatever it is you're trying to get across to the students by using that picture, they won't be able to see that. For websites, though, it is actually a benefit to provide alt text for your images, because it can improve your search engine optimization, which helps to rank your site higher in image search results. You want to use these anytime you're using an image or a graphic when you're presenting to others, and that includes documents, web pages, presentations, and emails. And I'm going to quickly show you how, again, simple way to add alt text. So there's a picture here at the bottom of my screen slide here, and you want to select the image, right click, and then you're going to select edit alt text. And there is alt text that is listed. I can't quite see it right now, but I think you guys can see it. I think it says something to the effect of students sitting at a table. You can change that. This was actually already there. A lot of times images aren't going to have alt text there, or if they do, it might not be appropriate alt text. So what you type in there really depends on how you're using the image. basically what the purpose of the image is and how it relates to the content that you are creating. Okay, so the last topic would be headings and structure. And so you want to use headings and structure with your content so that you can create order and to make sure that your content reads in the order that you want it to. Particularly gives audible navigational cues to screen reader users. Also, for someone who's using is only able to use the keyboard and is not able to use a mouse, having the order or appropriate order of your content is extremely useful for those folks. And you want to use this anytime you're creating documents, which would be Word, Google Docs, PDFs, PowerPoints, Google Slides, and web pages as well, Canvas and WordPress. Each of these items that I've named, they have pre-formatted headings and structures that you can use, and so that you don't have to try to figure out how do I make this work on my own. I do have a quick video that I want to, show. And this just gives some information about how you would create headings in Word.
Clear, well-formatted headings can go a long way toward making sure your Word documents meet global accessibility standards. Many people use screen readers to create a list of headings so they can skim the document to find the content they want.
Heading list dialog. Headings list view. Report scope: 1 of 9.
But this type of navigation works only when the document's author uses heading styles. Screen readers and text-to-speech tools are programmed to recognize them. To add a heading style to text in Word, select the text, choose the Home tab in the ribbon, and in the Styles box, pick the heading style you want. When you save your document in another format for download, such as HTML or PDF, Word retains the heading styles so everyone can still get the benefits of your headings. And remember, when you're writing headings, keep them short, specific to the information that follows them, and clear to someone new to the topic. For more tips on creating accessible content, visit aka.ms/accessible.
Okay. So just to give you a very quick introduction, I guess, to headings and structure. Like I said, with most software out there, or the most common software that we tend to use when creating content, you will find that there are a lot of accessibility features available, including how to properly use headings. So my last page here are resources. So like I said, depending on where you are with accessibility and your knowledge level, a lot of the things that I talked about, you may be able to do on your own, but you may need to also seek out additional assistance for those things, along with some other accessibility issues that would need to be addressed. So certainly seek out resources on your campus. I would first start with your Accessibility Services Office, your Disability Services Office, maybe your information or your tech support area could be the area that you'd want to go to. Also your e-learning or online learning departments could also be able to help you with some of these things. Specifically in a lot of software, there are, as I mentioned before, accessibility features. There are some accessibility checkers in Microsoft Office, Adobe, and Canvas. There's also WebAIM has a color contrast checker. There's browser extensions, which goes well beyond what you would have or what you would find in Microsoft Office or Adobe or Canvas. Accessible textbooks, the Access Text Network Text Network is a great site to go to if you want to check to see if the book you're looking to use has an accessible version, because that's very important and essential. I also have listed there captioning and audio description, transcription vendors for any audio or videos that you might need to have those services for. And then the last, I know we're right at the end of time, but the last resource that I encourage you to look at if you want more information, our accessibility resources website has a lot of great information, particularly if you want to do some things on your own. The Making Content Accessible is a great place to start. Has a lot of information about what I talked about today, but goes into even more detail. We have some information about accessibility and inclusivity, like if you have questions about why is accessibility important, universal design, that sort of thing. You're more than welcome to use any of the resources that we have. And there are other institutions out there that have similar websites. But if your institution does not, feel free to use ours, and have any questions, I would definitely be more than willing to work with you and answer any questions that you may have. So there's my contact information. I know we are right at time. So if you have any questions now, I'm more than willing to answer any questions before you go to your next session.
I did have a question, Melanie. Do you all use any kind of like the Blackboard Ally product or anything like that for checking course accessibility, that kind of stuff?
We don't. We actually, in my area, we have a group of folks that do testing. What we mainly use is Wave, Axe, and then we do manual testing. So we're not using that at this point, but I know that there are some other institutions that do.
Yeah, I think there was some talk about, I don't know if Enoch might be able to chime in. I think UNC Charlotte was looking at Ally at some point, maybe, or maybe it was NC State, one of those.
Yeah, I know NC State is using it, and I've heard that it can be a good tool to use, but as with most things, it's not going to check everything. Like I think right now there's still an issue with like outside documents. Like it'll check, I think, Canvas, and it'll check certain things that are within the website. But if there's an attached document, that would be something that you'd have to check separately.
Yeah, I think you're right.